Good morning. How are we all? Welcome to our second session all about the Battle of Hastings. It's not as warm as it was last week, and that's a good thing because we're going to be looking at storms, swords and sneaky moves. So today we're going to find out all about what actually happened, and it's a little bit, I think it's often referred to as the Battle of Hastings, but I think it's a little bit of a rubbish title on two fronts, and I shall talk to you about that as we go through the session. So welcome, thank you for joining me. Last week we looked at what happened in 1066, and what happened was that the current king, Edward the Confessor, died, and during that period of time it wasn't necessarily the obvious choice that your son or brother would become the king. It was chosen by a group of nobles called the Witan. It didn't matter anyway because Edward the Confessor didn't even have a son, and it led to four individuals all arguing that it should be them. And lots of you thought last week that you kind of felt like it was one particular person that deserved the throne. And we're not really going to talk about him very much today, but we will next week. Right, I can see that Maisie and Jack and Annalore, Sophie, Willow, Caden, Rose and Mima, Jaden and Myla, Hannah, Williams, Samantha and Corey and Isaac has joined us, and Oliver and Rocco and Maisie, yes, you were first today, Lucas, and George has made a Viking flatbread. Wow! Well, Harold Hardrada would be very pleased. I'm sad that you can't send over some Viking flatbread to me. But I said, who should be king? Now, can we remember, although I tried previous when I said about who the winner was between you guys as to who you thought should be the king, but then I've just accidentally let go of who one of them was. Can you remember the four claimants to the throne? Who were they? So I've accidentally given you one. I covered the name of the others saying it was just one of the people, and then I accidentally gave you another one. So who are the people? So yes, William, the Duke of Normandy. So he was hanging out in northern France. He believed that he should be the king, and he claimed that he had been promised it by Edward the Confessor. Anybody else, can you remember, that thought that they should be the king? So we always remember William, the Duke of Normandy. But who else? Who were the others? Yes, so the one that gave away, Isaac, good listening. Harold Hardrada, he was a Viking. Remember, in the Anglo-Saxon times, we had Vikings on the throne of England, and he believed that he had the rightful claim to the throne because in the past there had been a deal between the King of Norway and the King of England, that whoever died first, the other one could be given the kingship, but then it never happened. And so then many years later, Harold Hardrada decided that that meant he should be the king. I think his ideas were a little bit shaky. But do you remember Harold Hardrada was friends with somebody else's brother who didn't really like him? Yes, Harold with an O, Harold Godwinson. Remember, he had a brother called Tostig who he'd fallen out with, and who was then siding with Harold Hardrada. And Edgar, remember Edgar. So Edgar was the winner of your vote last week. You all thought that Edgar Atheling was the person that should be on the throne. So well done, we've remembered all the four contenders. But my first question to you is, can you remember out of these four, who had the support of the Witan? So the King of England was chosen by this group of people who actually had the support of the Witan. So it's all well and good saying, well, I think I should be the king, but you have to have the Witan support you. So who actually had the support of the Witan? Yes, Harold Godwinson. Now I've put this spelling on again. I'm going to, for most of this session, I'm going to refer to him and spell it like Godwinson, because that's how I always did it when I was little at school. And then as a teacher in a school, I always wrote it Godwinson, but sometimes you do see it Godwinson. So both spellings are okay. It's to do with the fact that there isn't a huge amount of written evidence of these people. So, but yes, so Harold Godwinson, or you may see it as Harold Godwinson, he had the support of the Witan, mainly because he was one of the most powerful nobles. He was from Wessex, which was the most important area of he was the most important, which was one of the most important areas of England. Now, next one. Who had the greatest blood tie? So if you were going to decide on, who has the blood tie, so the blood tie is the person that's actually related somehow genetically to the previous king, who has the greatest blood tie? The Witan is basically just the present Pope has passed away, which is very sad. Well, there's like a big group of people who will choose the Pope's successor. The Witan is just a very similar idea. So in England in 1066, if the king passed away, a group of important people would make the decision over who they felt was the best king for the job. And you could argue actually that this is it's kind of quite a good thing, because the king is, at this time of history, is the person that's completely in charge of the country. And so actually, just because you're a blood tie doesn't mean that you're going to be any good. So I think the Witan is basically a group of people that all get together and decide who is going to be the best king. And it's not necessarily based on who is the blood tie. But lots of you have got it correct. Edgar is the person that actually, and the only person really, that had any sort of blood tie. Okay. Who had been promised it? Who had been promised the throne by Edward the Confessor? So who had been promised the throne by Edward the Confessor? This is a slightly trick question, but who had been promised the throne by Edward the Confessor? Oh, lots of thinking. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because there's quite a few people that claim that they had it promised to them. So William of Normandy is a really obvious one. So he claims that he had been promised it by Edward the Confessor. And if you see, if you look in the Bay Tapestry, you can definitely, which was stitched by the French. But if you look in the Bay Tapestry, there's certainly evidence to suggest that William believed he definitely had been promised it by Edward the Confessor. However, Edgar Atheling, his father, God, I know you've got proper Cornish then. His father had been sent by a previous ruler. He had been banished, and he was called back to England. And Edgar Atheling had lived in the court of Edward. And so some people believe that he was secretly promised it as well, although there's not a lot of evidence there. But you could argue Edgar also potentially had been promised it, because if he wasn't being set up to be the next king, why did Edward the Confessor get him back from exile, and his dad back from exile? And then when his dad died, why did Edward the Confessor look after him if it wasn't that he was going to be promised the throne? But you could say Edgar. And then Harold with an O. Harold Godwinson claimed that he had also been promised it as the dying king took his last breath. He supposedly said, Harold with an O, I want you to be the king. So Harold Godwinson also claimed he had been promised it. So therefore you've got to say, well, who had been promised it last? Because you could argue 3 of them believe that they had been promised it. So surely who gets the most, who's like the most important? Who gets the biggest, greatest dibs? Well, the greatest dib really goes to Harold with an O, Harold Godwinson, because he had, in theory, if it's true, been promised it last, because Edward the Confessor supposedly, as he was laying in his bed dying, said, I want Harold Godwinson to have it. So if you're going on last, where it gets quite tricky, as we looked at last week, is William of Normandy argued that Harold Godwinson had told him in the past and sworn on a holy relic that he would honour William's claim to the throne. But some suggestions are that actually that was all a trick and Harold Godwinson was tricked into swearing that oath. But we're going to look at in lesson 4 why understanding and learning about the Battle of Hastings is tricky, because there's not a lot of written evidence. But the last person to be promised it really was Harold with an O. And then that leads us to the next thing that the Witan were looking for, is who had the most political power? Who out of these 4 is likely to be supported the most by the nobles and the rich people of England out of all 4 of these? Well, it's not going to be Harald Hardrada, because he's a Viking and he's not actually even living in England. He's in Norway. Edgar Atheling, if you remember, was a teenager, so he has no political power whatsoever. William of Normandy, again, he's over in France. He doesn't have any political power. It's Harold Godwinson. Harold Godwinson definitely has the most political power, and all the supporters of England support him. So it's a really, really tricky one. But what happens is that Harold Hardrada decides with Tostig, with Harold Godwinson's brother, to invade England. So Harold with an O, Harold G, is crowned the king. He has the most political power. He has the support of the Witan, and he claims that he was promised it last by the exiting king. And so what happens is that Harold Hardrada goes, no, I'm not having that. I think I should have the throne. So he gets in his ships and he sails over, and because he's obviously coming from Norway, like a lot of Viking invasions, they land in the north. Now, Harold Godwinson is down in the south because he has been crowned the King of England. Remember, he has lots of political support. Harold Hardrada arrives on the shores of the north of England to battle and claim the throne. Now, Harold G is down in the south. He's a bit like, well, I'm not going up there. I've got lots of northern earls that can provide some troops. They can deal with it. And so the troops are provided by the northern earls, and they amount to about 5,000 troops. So Harold with a G sends note to the northern earls, get together an army and kick out Harold Hardrada back to Norway, and they amass 5,000 troops. But Harold Hardrada has arrived, and he has arrived on the coast of northern England with 6,000 troops and 4,000 reserves. So a reserve is somebody that you kind of slot in if your original 6,000 don't last very long. So all in all, Harold Hardrada rocks up with about 10,000 troops, which is pretty full on. It's a battle that happens in Fulford. It's called the Battle of Fulford. My prediction to you is, who is going to win? Do you think the northern earls are going to win, or do you think Harold Hardrada is going to win? 5,000 versus 10,000. What do you reckon? Who do you reckon is going to win? So who do you reckon wins? So do you reckon the northern earls win, or do you reckon Harold Hardrada wins? What do you reckon? Well, I don't think it takes much to predict. I think if you were going to predict, a fight between 5,000 people and 10,000 people, I think probably you're going to go for the 10,000 people. And so you would be right. Harold Hardrada wins. which then makes Harold Godwinson a little bit cross, because he's like, for goodness sake, I've asked my northern earls to get rid of Harald Hardrada, and he hasn't done it. They haven't done it. So Harold Godwinson gets together all his troops, and they march 185 miles in 4 days, which is an incredible speed if you look at it. So he gets all of his troops. Now he has 12,000 troops, and he also takes 3,000 highly trained soldiers known as housecarls. So these are really, they're not just sort of any old rabble, they are highly trained soldiers. So Harold Godwinson marches 185 miles in 4 days, and he rocks up with 12,000 soldiers plus 3,000 highly trained soldiers. So that is 15,000 soldiers. And Harald Hardrada, he's already kind of fought part of his battle. He's only got 9,000 of his troops left. So who do you think won? Now, this is a very famous battle. It's the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Obviously, it happens up in the north of England. Any idea who wins? And this is where it gets very complicated for any teachers, because, of course, you've got Harold with an O versus Harold with an A. But I think it's probably quite obvious again, because it's about fighting power at this point. It's not about who's right. It's about who can amass the biggest force of people. And on that day, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, it is Harold with an O. So Harold Godwinson and his troops completely thrash Harald Hardrada. Harald Hardrada is killed, and that therefore removes any Viking claim to the throne. So Norway, you know, by the removal of Harald Hardrada, he's dead. That's removed that threat from England and from Harold with an O. And historians argue that if this had been the battle and we were looking at it, this would have sent Harold Godwinson down in history as being one of the strongest kings of England, because they did win. But of course, what happens is 5,000 of his troops die in the process. So although he wins and Hardrada is dead, and his brother Tostig also is dead, he has lost 5,000 of Harold's troops. But then what happens is that a storm had been keeping William, the Duke of Normandy, stuck in France. So this is kind of one of these sort of things of history. What happens if he'd arrived first? Because if he'd arrived before Harold Hardrada, history might have been very different. But he didn't arrive first. Hardrada arrived first because William was stuck in France because the wind, because remember, everything was sail power in those days. And so the wind wasn't in the right direction and they couldn't sail. But basically, as soon as the Battle of Stamford Bridge is over, Harold with an O hears that William, the Duke of Normandy, has arrived on the south coast. And William, the Duke of Normandy, arrives with 9,000 troops. Now, what happens is that Harold Godwinson then has to march all his troops all the way back down to the south of England, 185 miles in 4 days. And so basically what happens is 5,000 of his troops basically just don't make it because, I don't know, they're just too tired. So he's lost lots that have died in the Battle of Stamford Bridge, but also 5,000 of them just sort of slope off, maybe sort of are too tired to carry on walking, too exhausted, too injured. And so he rocks up to meet the William, Duke of Normandy, with only 5,000 of his troops. But he is boosted. So he's boosted by 2,000 untrained working men. So as he's sort of travelling back down, he picks up a further 2,000, just random farm workers and whoever feels like fighting. So he rocks up with 7,000 untrained, 7,000 troops, 2,000 of them who are untrained. But as I said, they've marched 185 miles in 4 days. They've done a huge battle, and then they've marched all the way back down again. So those 5,000 troops are incredibly tired, whereas William's 9,000 troops are pretty fresh. So who wins? Well, it's one of those biggest battles of history that is incredibly famous. He is called William the Conqueror for a reason, because he does win and he becomes the King of England. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to work out. I'm going to turn my camera off actually, so you can see it a bit better. On here we have got all of the dates, the story that I've kind of told you of how it all comes to pass. So have a little look. What is the order? Now this is from a resource online that you can, if you want, after the session, cut out and make your own great timeline of the Battle of Hastings. But what is the correct order? So we've got 1064, Harold Godwinson's boat is shipwrecked in Normandy. 25th of December, 1066, William marches through England after capturing the city of London and is crowned the king. 6th of January, 1066, Harold Godwinson is crowned king. The 5th of January, King Edward dies. 14th of October, the Battle of Hastings commences. 1065, Harold returns to England after swearing an oath of allegiance to William. 25th of September, Harold Hardrada's army are defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. 27th of September, William of Normandy arrives in Sussex. And January 1066, William and Harold Hardrada plan their invasion. It is a sheet. Obviously you don't need to do it now. I just want to sort of work out the order of the story, because I was to see how well you were listening to me. It is a sheet. It should be linked. I'm pretty sure it is linked off of the blog. Can I get rid of the time? I can get rid of the time, explorers. There we go. Now, don't forget, if you think I'm going too fast, you can always pause it. Yeah, they're all 1066 about, other than 1064 and 1065. So you can point to them, work it out, tell the story again at home to a grown-up. Let's work out the order. Right, so are we ready for the answers? Don't forget, you can pause me if you think I'm going too quick and you would like to work out the story for yourself with a little bit more time, but we're going to go through the answers. So 1064 and 1065, I have talked about this already. I'm going to shelve that a little bit until lesson 4. But as I've told you, supposedly the story goes, according to William, that Harold was shipwrecked in Normandy, and whilst he was there, he swore an oath of allegiance to William. But you've got to take that potentially with a pinch of salt, because, which is kind of a saying for, you've got to kind of question that, because the only person that said that definitely happened was the person that won the Battle of Hastings. And obviously he needed an excuse to fight in the first place. But this is the correct date. So the 5th of January, so the beginning of the year, Edward dies. And the very next day, the 6th of January, Harold Godwinson is crowned king, which leads to Harold, with an A, Harold Hardrada, Viking Harold, and William of Normandy to start to plan their invasion. Now, as I have said to you, there is very much weather plays a part, because Hardrada arrives first. The battle that Godwinson attends is on the 25th of September, and then literally 2 days later, William of Normandy arrives. So if you're talking about how what bad luck this is for Harold Godwinson, you know, if his earls had got rid of Harold Hardrada and he hadn't had to march up there, he might have won against William of Normandy. But basically he doesn't. On the 14th of October is the Battle of Hastings. King Harold is killed, and William marches through England and is crowned the King of England on Christmas Day 1066. So that's kind of how the story goes. But we're going to look a little bit now at what actually, we're going to play like a little game of who said it. Now, they didn't actually say it. I just made it up and pretended that they could have said it. So the first thing I would say is it's just a game. So we're going to just imagine who might have said it. So we came across the sea in long ships ready for battle. I've never seen such a huge army, and I've fought in many lands. So who do we think said it? Do we think Harold G said it, Harold H said it, William of Normandy said it, or a Viking soldier said it? We came across the sea in long ships ready for battle. I've never seen such a huge army, and I've fought in many lands. Now let's have a see. Some of you think it's Harold with an A, Viking Harold. It's not Viking Harold, because he would know. He would know what army he's taking over. It's a Viking soldier. But they did take over such a big army. So Viking Harold obviously meant business, but he obviously did lost. The crown was promised to me, and I mean to take it with force. Harold broke his oath. He will regret it. So who do we think pretend might have said it? So William of Normandy, Harold Godwinson, Harold Hardrada, an English soldier. The crown was promised to me, and I mean to take it with force. Harold broke his oath. He will regret it. Yes, you've got it. It is William of Normandy. He did say that Harold had sworn an oath that he could have the throne, but whether or not he did, we'll never know. But yes, it is William of Normandy. I hate my brother, and he betrayed me. He will regret it, as I have returned with the strongest Viking king in the world to seek my revenge. Do you think that's William, Tostig, Harold G, or Viking Harold? So who do we think said that? I hate my brother, and he betrayed me. He will regret it. Yes. Can you imagine, though, lining up on a battlefield? Because in these days, your king went to battle with you. But could you just imagine lining up in battle, knowing that your brother is on the other side, and that he's going to potentially die, or you're going to potentially have to kill him? I just couldn't imagine that. But yes, it's Tostig Godwinson, and sadly he won't regret it, because poor Tostig dies in the battle. For goodness sake, how many miles do I need to march my army around England in order to keep the crown, which is rightfully mine? So who might have said that? For goodness sake, how many miles do I need to march my army around England in order to keep the crown, which is rightfully mine? So Harold with an H, Viking Harold, William of Normandy, Harold Godwinson, or a Saxon soldier? Who do you reckon said that? I do feel sorry for Harold Godwinson, because it is, you've got it right, it's Harold Godwinson. So he has to march all the way up to the north of England and all the way back down again, and fight 2 battles. So yeah, I do feel a little bit like history was not on his side. They thought we were beaten. How silly were they? Those shield walls are tough but not unbreakable. So who do you think that was? Sounds like somebody who won. Harold Godwinson, a Norman soldier, William of Normandy, or an English archer? What do we think? So they thought we were beaten. How silly were they? Those shield walls are tough but not unbreakable. Now, this one could be 2 answers. Lots of you are going for William. I've gone for a Norman soldier, but it could have been William of Normandy. Could be B or C, because we are talking about the Normans. And what we're going to think about now is that Battle of Hastings. So I'm going to the actual battle between William, the Duke of Normandy, and with Harold Godwinson. And I found a great poem that I thought I would read to you, because it tells you all about the Battle of Hastings and what actually happened during that battle. Because it's another example, we're going to look more at the battle next week, and think about, did Harold lose or did William win? Because I think there's a difference there. But what we're going to do is just find out what actually happened in this battle. So I'm going to read the poem, and you're more than welcome to read it along with me. Thousands of brave soldiers sailed from Normandy to fight, defending their leader William, who had the crown of England in sight. Determination, courage, valour and pride, they swallowed their hesitation and took the challenge in their stride. King Harold had previously beaten several rivals for the throne. He believed he was the rightful king and would not be overthrown. He had an army of 5,000, mostly peasant farmers. They did not have any cavalry, but relied on weapons and armour. In October 1066, the Battle of Hastings began. The Saxons were tactical and formed a cunning plan. Tired from recent battles, they waited on top of Senlac Hill, overlapping their shields for protection, following the king's drill. The Normans marched towards them, firing arrows at their shields. At first, the Saxons defended bravely on the battlefield. The cavalry fell to break through. The Saxons' defence was strong. William's troops realised that their strategy was wrong. His troops were ordered to pretend to retreat and turn around. The plan worked, and Harold's men followed them along the ground. The Saxon shield wall had broken. It left them vulnerable and weak. The Norman charged towards their enemies. For the Saxons it looked bleak. William's soldiers, archers and cavalry charged back up the hill. Harold's army, although outnumbered, fought with courage and will. But the Normans overcame the Saxons, and Harold was defeated. The Saxons lost all hope. Many fled and retreated. William became king, and French was spoken in his court. To establish his authority, he ordered the construction of many forts. The embroidered Bayeux tapestry tells the famous battle story of the long 9-hour encounter and the Normans' glory. So that's what actually happened in the Battle of Hastings. Now you can go to the battle site. It's near to Hastings. The first thing to say is it didn't actually happen in Hastings. This might be something that you already know, but it happened in a place called Battle. But after the battle, because it was such a huge battle for English history, people decided that the Battle of Battle sounded a bit rubbish. And they said, oh, we can't call it that. We can't call it the Battle of Battle. And so therefore it was changed to the Battle of Hastings. But it wasn't actually fought in Hastings. It was fought in Battle. And you can go to Battle and you can go to the site of the Battle of Hastings. I've been myself. But it's one of those, again, those periods of history that you just think, gosh, could have gone so many different ways. So the Saxons, so the Anglo-Saxons, so Harold G was on the top of a hill. Now, everybody knows if you are on the high ground, you are in the best position. So when the battle happened, Harold G and all his troops were on the top of the hill, and the Normans were at the bottom of the hill. And due to just gravity, it's far easier to fight downwards than it is upwards. And so if you go to battle and you look and you stand on the top of Senlac Hill, you think, I do not know how on earth the Anglo-Saxons lost, how Harold lost. But basically, the Anglo-Saxons were at the top of the hill. They were in a huge shield wall. The Normans arrived. They couldn't break that shield wall. They had archers, they had cavalry, but they just couldn't break it. It was too strong. And then basically the tactic from William was, if you turn around and run and pretend like you're running away, maybe the soldiers will break ranks. And that's exactly what happened. So they were running up the hill trying to fight, and then they all turned around and went, the Anglo-Saxons, they're far too strong for us. We're not going to win. Retreat. And what happened is the Anglo-Saxons on the top of Senlac Hill broke that shield wall and went, yeah, we're amazing. And they ran down the hill after the Normans, at which point the Normans sort of did a right 180 and turned around, 180, and completely slaughtered loads and loads of Anglo-Saxons. At this point, Harold dies. That's an argument for another week. As to, some people say he was shot in the eye, some people say he was slashed down with a sword. Don't think we'll ever really concisely know. But at this point, Harold dies. The shout goes out that Harold dies, and so lots of the Anglo-Saxons run away and desert because they know the king is dead. And then at that point, William knows that he has won. But it's one of those things I look and think about, gosh, if they just held their ground at the top of Senlac Hill, maybe William the Conqueror would not have been known as William the Conqueror. But there we go. Ego is always plays a really big part. If you've got soldiers going, run away, they're too scary. I think, they were all like, way, let's chase after them, guys, and let's get them. But obviously it didn't work out. And poor Harold Godwinson is dead, and William, the Duke of Normandy, becomes the king. Now, this is often referred to as one of the most important battles to have occurred in British history. I'm going to ask you this question again at the end of the 4 sessions, but this is the question I'm going to leave you to discuss with your grown-ups, because it's a huge thing. It's also back to this argument about might winning over what necessarily is right, because Harold Godwinson had been chosen by the Witan. He had the strongest support out of everybody. He was supported by the earls and all of the important people in England, and yet he, due to really potentially a horrible chain of events, he ends up obviously dead on the field of battle. But obviously we end up with the Duke of Normandy as the King of England. I'm going to ask you again this question at the end of session 4. But many historians do argue that this was the most important battle ever to have occurred in British history. Obviously, that's an interpretation. I could get lots of other historians that would say absolutely not. So some historians might argue it was one of the most important battles ever to have occurred on British soil. But what do you think? So that's something for you to have a little think about and chat about at home, because that's what history is all about. There's interpretation. There's no correct answer. Next week, we're going to explore this in a little bit more detail as to whether William really did win or whether Harold lost, because they are really different. you know, you can win because you were the best, or you could lose because the other side made mistakes, or you know, had fate against them. But that's what we're going to look at next week. Have a lovely week. I'm pretty sure the timeline is on the blog, but do let me know if it's not and you want to do it. But there are lots of other activities on the blog, which is Siege and Strength, the Battle of Hastings. So do please go over and click onto the blog, and then click on some resources and download them, and have some fun looking at the Battle of Hastings in more detail. Have a lovely rest of the week, and do share anything that you get up to with the Battle of Hastings. And as I said, if you're near sort of West Sussex, Kent type way, go and check it out. The Battle of Battle. I definitely think it should have been called that. Anyway, have a lovely week, and I'll see you soon.